Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. My name is Danielle Harvey and I'm the festival director. FODI is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival based in Sydney, Australia, that aims to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. FODI gathers the world's best experts, innovative thinkers and mischief makers to provoke and inspire curious minds. Being open about the female body has always been taboo, risky and dangerous. So, by smashing ancient menstrual taboos and demolishing dangerous pseudoscience, the internet's OB-GYN Gunter is on a mission to destigmatise the myths and misogyny surrounding women's health. In her 2024 talk, Lifting the Curse, Gunter urges women to seize control, reminding them that it shouldn't be an act of feminism to know how their bodies work.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here. We have been enjoying Australia, and this is a spectacular country, and now I'm already planning my next visit back. So I'm determined to pick a mango fresh off a tree, which is not something you can do in North America. So I'm told I have to come back in December for that. So I want to talk about two different interrelated dangerous ideas. So one kind of dangerous idea threatens the status quo, which is really the patriarchy. But the other kind of dangerous idea is one that is misinformation and disinformation, right? Something that can lead you astray. And so I want to talk about the sort of strange duality of that and how that's becoming actually more difficult to distinguish between the two. So, whether it's menstruation or menopause, vaginal health or contraception, it's hard to believe that these are dangerous ideas. And yet, we have so much disinformation that abounds here. So obviously, these are dangerous ideas. It is dangerous to empower people with knowledge about their body. Well, it's dangerous for the patriarchy. It's not dangerous to anybody sitting in the room. And whenever you're getting a talk ready, you always think, oh, what's something current that I could put in? And there was no better image than this. So for those of you who are following the politics in America, and Tim Walz is the vice presidential candidate with Kamala Harris, and the Republicans thought it would be an insult to call him Tampon Tim because when he was governor, he enacted a law that tampons should be free in schools for anyone who needs them. Now, of course, it was immediately weaponized by transphobes to say that he's requiring that, every male bathroom have them. And in fact, if you look at the law, that wasn't written. It was just the schools should put them where the schools feel it's appropriate. But this became this whole cultural firestorm. But then it didn't, because it didn't go anywhere, because women were like, tampon's great. He's like tampon Santa Claus. That's awesome, right? And so that actually gave me hope that this trying to weaponize a really good law that is really important is kind of like feeding children in school. It's kind of getting people to not bleed on their clothes. How's that like a bad thing? That society actually rejected it really quickly. So that's actually a positive thing. And I want to kind of hang on to that there's hope. So original sins, these are the original dangerous ideas, right? These are the things that uphold the patriarchy, that a woman's body is inferior to a man's. And one of the examples of that is menstruation, because that's a sign that we can't balance our fluids, right? We have leaky plumbing, so we got to leak something out. Men are in perfect balance. They don't have to. You got an answer right there, right? So if you want to oppress half the population, it's really great to say, well, your body is like inherently problematic. We also define women by their status as being a breeder, and virginity, which is a social construct, which is not medical, and there's nothing medical about it, sort of becomes this thing. And it's really fascinating, the things that were believed about women's bodies. So, for example, that women could, before I get to that, I want to talk just a little bit about some other language that you might see. So when you're talking about original sins and you're talking about, how these words are weaponized, you see what are called God terms in rhetoric. So God terms are words like pure, clean, natural, wholesome. And if you've walked through any sort of product aisle that was geared towards, a woman buying it, you will see those words used all the time. You also use them and see them in many other places, but they're really particularly geared for things for women's bodies. And it's very fascinating because there was a time when medicine and religion were the same. And as I mentioned, it was all about your four humors and being in balance. And being in balance would bring you closer to God, closer to nature. Nature was God. And so all these terms are things that we associate positivity with, right? So if I tell you that my granola that I'm selling is all natural, you're going to assume that my granola is better. I don't have to tell you that. A God term makes you fill in those blanks, right? So I want you throughout your whole life going forward to pay attention to these terms because they're really marketing. And they stuck around from the time when religion and medicine were the same and when we, needed to be in perfect balance. And this search for balance and purity has really been co-opted by pseudoscience. So taboos. Menstruation is toxic. And what was the evidence given for that? Well, did you know that if you put a menstruating woman out in a storm, you could stop a storm? Really? Okay, so why weren't all the sailors then women, right? You would have smooth seas all the time. Menstruating women could wither crops. Menstruating women could cause a pregnant mare to miscarry. Right? Menstruating women were especially toxic to men. Menstruating women could even make purple lose its luster. So all of these things are, I know, right? You're like, this is all pretty empiric. And you could say, well, it was 2,000 years BC, what did they know? Well, except in 5,000 BC, Greek mathematicians had a pretty good idea that the Earth was round. And they initially thought that because of seeing the Earth's shadow go across the moon during eclipses. So I'm like, so you can apply empiric, things that you see around you to mathematics, but not to the female body. Oh, okay. So obviously, again, it's about weaponizing bodies, right? Sex is sinful, but just for women. Menstruation is toxic. And lest you think some of these ideas are so old, we still see discussions about virginity all the time, which shouldn't even be a thing. That's like getting obsessed over baby teeth, right? And we still see in the 1970s, there were actually articles written in The Lancet, a major medical journal, about how menstruating women could wilt flowers. The 1970s, right? That's like the 1970s. So these ideas are not that far behind. So what are the consequences? So the consequence of something is a taboo. You don't study it. You don't learn about it. You don't learn about your body. And so if you don't know what's abnormal, how do you know to ask for help? I use my own experience. When I started menstruating, I had catastrophically heavy periods, but I didn't know they were catastrophically heavy because no one ever talked about it. Right? My mother no one talked about it. So I just assumed it was normal to leak onto your bed. I just assumed it was normal to have to wear 2 pads all the time. I just thought, well, that must be why they call it the curse. This is pretty problematic. Found out that I had anemia. I was, in fact, in the 40% of women under the age of 22 who were iron deficient from their menstruation. Iron deficiency is a real medical condition, completely underdiagnosed, and many women suffer with it for years. And all of this is a consequence of if menstruation is taboo, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to study about it. And even if we're going to do those things, we're going to make access to care for it more difficult. Because I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I certainly know in Canada and the United States that many women have difficulty getting access to iron infusions to treat their iron deficiency, because I guess it's not that bad because it was caused by menstruation. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but again, that is the patriarchy. It doesn't make sense. It exists to maintain the status quo. Here's another consequence of taboos. And this was Bill Clinton's famous line from 1992. Abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. I'm going to agree with you on the first 2, Bill, but not on the second 2. The second one, when you say abortion should be rare, then what you mean is it's a problem. There's something wrong with it. We should keep something rare that we need to not talk about. I mean, appendectomies shouldn't be rare. They should just have the rate of appendectomies that are required by society, right? So when you add rare, you imply that there's a danger, that there's a problem, and you allow people to sort of claim a mantle that they don't deserve. And certainly in the United States, we see all kinds of discussions from supposedly pro-life individuals, except they're not pro-life, because they certainly don't care about the lives of pregnant people. They don't care about the lives of the children after they're born. So then what they really are forced birthers, right? There's a difference. And so when I say that there aren't always two sides, which is something I think a lot of philosophers and maybe people here, at the conference be like, oh no, there's always two sides. No, there's only two sides if both parties are entering the argument in good faith. If one person is not entering the argument in good faith, then you're not having the same discussion. They're not discussing the same thing. And so, I give an example how when, Roe versus Wade was overturned in the United States, the law that, made abortion legal, that, I was asked to be on the CBC to talk about it because in Canada, I'm well known in Canada. I can translate this law and what it might mean for people in Canada. And I said, well, who else are you going to have on? Oh, we're going to have so-and-so. It's like, to support the pro-life side. I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's no such thing as pro-life. There's forced birth. I looked the person up. Of course, they don't support any policies that any rational person would consider to be pro-life. And I said, well, I'm not going to come on unless you get a different person, because that's a disingenuous side. I'm happy to have a discussion with someone who will identify themselves as forced birth and who will say that they don't care about women dying because of abortion laws, that they don't care about, pulling fetal skulls out of abdomens because of botched abortions, that they don't care about the rise in infant mortality, and they don't care about maternal mortality. I'm happy to have a discussion with that person, but you're allowing this person to claim a mantle that they don't have. And we see a lot of that. We see a lot of the press looking for two sides and not actually interrogating what the other side's position really is. And, I guess it gets page clicks, but we all pay the price. Another consequence that we see about taboos, about lack of research, about systematic underfunding are fears about contraception. Now, there are valid concerns about side effects with every medication. And it is true that many women will go to the doctor's office and they might be given a birth control pill with an insufficient explanation about why that's the best treatment, or they're not given other alternatives. That can be true. But what's also true is this fear is now being weaponized by right-wing forces in the United States to advance the idea that contraception is dangerous and contraception is toxic. And, this is a screenshot of Tucker Carlson, who's, a sad excuse for a human being on Fox News. It's just the idea about discussing anything to do with a female body with him. He gives you the creeps through the internet, right? You don't even have to be in the same room to be yeah, creep. And so, to hear these people, what people don't realize is pseudoscience is very invested in getting people away from contraception, because that's how you sell your hormone balancing supplement. If people are on the birth control pill, you can't tell them you need to balance their hormones, right? If people are on the birth control pill, you can't sell them your period coaching, which is a thing now. I'm like, really? You're going to coach my period to do what? I'm going to become like an X-Man, and that's going to be my power. I mean, actually, that's in The Boys. If anyone's seen the Amazon series, I think that's actually was really cool. One of the people affected by the serum that they're given can manipulate blood. Oh, that's pretty cool. And so, predators profit from these gaps, from having these fears about contraception. And I want to just kind of walk through contraception as an example about how these lines between, what's really a dangerous idea and what's one cloaked as a dangerous idea, right? So when we have pseudoscience and it comes to women's bodies especially, it's very truthy. They feel it to you. They're going on vibes. They don't need to have facts, right? And, it comes from Stephen Colbert when he had, the Colbert Report. In his very first episode, he said he was going to feel the news to you, right? And that's exactly what happens with pseudoscience. So information is taken, some of it might be true, it's spun and it's reworked. And so here's an example. This myth has been around on the internet, since Al Gore invented the internet, basically, that birth control is a class 1 carcinogen. Okay, well, That's kind of a conspiracy theory right there. So you see a lot of conspiracy theories. Well, gosh, if it's that dangerous, then people must be keeping that from us, right? Especially if the World Health Organization says it is, because they do. It's also a devil term. So I mentioned that there were God terms: pure, clean, natural. Well, what are we stuck with in medicine? We're stuck with devil terms. Oh, we want to prevent cancer. We want to treat pain. We want to treat. So all the things that we're trying to treat are actually like devil terms. So things that we negatively have a connotation with. There's a kernel of truth, because you know what? All estrogen is carcinogenic. If I gave every single person who walked in my office with a uterus massive doses of estrogen, I give them cancer of the uterus. It's estrogen is carcinogenic. That's a property of estrogen. It's just the WHO can't label your ovaries as being a class 1 carcinogen, right? So kernel of truth, distorted. Birth control is polluting your purity. That is really an extension of a lot of the things that you see. And again, back to those God terms: fear about purity, fear about that wholesomeness that we're supposed to achieve. And it also serves the patriarchy, right? Because you know, when you're able to be a breeder, you're not on birth control, you're able to be a breeder, you're able to serve the patriarchy. So it's really important that people think about these things. Now, what's another taboo that we hear a lot about? Well, we hear that a wet vagina is a dangerous vagina. Obviously by someone who has never touched a vagina. So I'm like, to all those ancient dudes, really? Wow, yeah. Your wife must have been like, oh yeah, he's a real peach. So yeah, go off on that long sea expedition and make sure there's no women there to stop the storms, okay? So, you know, this comes again from the idea of fluid imbalance and the idea of, you know, people having no understanding about what was going on with vaginal discharge, but also the fact that a wet vagina meant that you were sexually experienced, right? And if you're a breeder, you need to just be a breeder for one person. And it's amazing to see how this absolute myth has been perpetuated in so many cultures. When you go to so many different cultures, vaginal products are almost all astringents. And what do astringents do? They dry the vagina, right? So it's all about that. When I spoke a few years ago to someone who worked at a women's magazine, and I was like, God, why do you have to have so many articles about vaginal mayhem? Like, what is up with that? Like, what about incontinence? You know what? Women suffer from that too. Maybe you want to write about that, or heavy bleeding. And they're like, if it's not a vaginal catastrophe, it doesn't sell. And it's because these things are baked into us. If your mother and her mother and her mother and her mother and so on since the beginning of time had been led to believe these taboos about their bodies, even if you don't believe them today, so many molecules around you do, and it's hard to not absorb it. This is from Target in the United States. These are all shelves of products that are useless, but are all designed to make your vagina and vulva be better. So look at the 4 shelves, look at the whole length of it. And I'm pleased to say that, now I don't know if the price line I went to was representative of all of Australia, but I was pleased to see that these products occupied just a very small shelf at the bottom. So I'm hoping that that's more reflective, but I could also be a sample size error. But these products are not much different than this ad from almost 100 years ago. Oh, she was a jewel of a wife, but she just had like one neglect. Her neglect was her vagina. And she should be douching with Lysol, right? Now, how does this come about? Well, you know, Lysol douches were also a way to bring about an abortion, or they believed to be. They were not an effective abortifacient. But so you can couch these terms because people can believe these myths about their vagina. You can sneak in this sort of sales job about an abortifacient, and it all becomes mixed up. And people believe then that there is a problem with their vagina when, you know, there isn't. Sometimes it's just a mediocre man. And we see all of these things, like, you know, every single day someone sends me an article about balancing vaginal pH. Like, that's not a thing. It's not a thing. I don't know how to explain that, but that's not how the whole system works. And the idea that you can change the smell of a vagina with the food that you eat. I'm like, okay. So what aromatic compound does that? What's the name of the chemical? Oh, you don't have one. Okay. What's the mechanism? How does that reach the vagina? Oh, you don't have that. Okay. So then when you hear things about how a vagina could smell better, how it could taste better, well, what someone's really saying is that the default state is problematic when it's not, right? So it's always important to carry those conversations through to the end. Now, I'd like to think that we can depend on the press to give us good information, but we can't because, the press serves, needs page clicks. The press serves the patriarchy. The patriarchy is what pays the bills. And these are two screenshots from almost a year apart. The first one's from January 2023 when there's a big hoo-ha about menstrual underwear having dangerous chemicals. And it was based on a lawsuit, and the lawsuit was based on the advertising of the product, not on any actual studies that show any safety issues, but it was a small suit based on the wording. It could be misinterpreted. So that's what that was about. Headline after headline, people terrified to use, menstrual underwear. And I'm like, those chemicals are probably not crawling up inside your vagina. I mean, I'm just saying. And all of those chemicals are in your yoga pants. And those cover a larger surface area. So why are we not concerned about yoga pants? Why is it just menstrual underwear? Oh, because scaring people about vaginas makes copy. And then we've just seen a big brouhaha about lead in tampons, right, and arsenic. How many people here heard that? Can anybody hear that? Okay. So maybe 20, 30%, 50% of people here I can't really see too well. So why? Well, that was a preliminary study that showed very minute amounts. And why might there be lead in cotton and rayon? Because there's lead in the soil. Right? There's arsenic in the soil. Our soil's all contaminated. It's not put there. It's not something that's there in dangerous amounts. In fact, the levels are so low that they're actually less in a tampon than there is allowed in a bottle of drinking water, right? So you're like, oh, so somebody could drink 2 to 3 bottles of water a day and actually ingest far more lead than they could ever be exposed to in 6 months of tampon wearing. But that's not important for women's health. So again, it's back to scaring people about their vaginas and about what makes copy. And of course, what was neglected in all of this discussion was that there had actually been a previous study looking at lead levels for people who wore tampons and people who didn't. And guess what? There was no difference, right? But somebody had a press release that they sent to try to get attention, and the press, when they see something about vagina, they just got to write about it. And here you are, and you have a panic. And it's like, so what? Like, are people not going to be happy until people are just bleeding all over their clothes? You can't use menstrual underwear, it's dangerous. You can't use pads, it's dangerous. You can't use. So, like, what are people supposed to do then? Oh, they're supposed to stay at home like they did in the old days. They're supposed to just not engage with society for 6 or 7 days. Oh, I see. That's kind of the patriarchal underpinning to that message, whether people realize they're saying that or not. And then let's talk about maybe one of the final taboos, menopause. This is Queen Elizabeth I. It's a picture I took when we were at the Portrait Gallery in London, so that's why it's like, not great. But I was fascinated by this because, you think when someone's trying to curry favor with a queen, are you going to paint her as looking age appropriate? And apparently this was a painting the queen loved because even though she was age appropriate, if he had her painted as looking much younger, that would have been like sucking up and currying favor. And instead of focusing on her looks, there's all kinds of tells in the painting about her power, about the things that she had done that were powerful. And that's why this was apparently one of her favorite portraits. And I find that fascinating, right? That the focus on power actually worked, which is the cool thing, not the focus on your appearance, not the focus on that. But it's hard, when you don't talk about things like menopause. It really does feel like one of the last taboos. The older terms for menopause were a woman's winter or death of sex. That's really great terms. We don't refer to men's bodies in those ways, right? If we did, we'd say that erectile dysfunction was penile failure. So, some of the very words that we use to describe things with a man's body, they get all kinds of nice euphemisms. We don't see those with women's bodies. And that obviously can lead to a lot of disinformation. The fact that people don't know even what menopause is, they don't know about the options, they don't know because it's difficult to talk about actually being an aging person, right? If you're a woman, if you're a man, it's fine. You become a silver fox. So what are the consequences of information gaps? So this is a picture of a book, Feminine Forever, from 1966, which basically took the position that, you became an ugly crone when you went through menopause, because the worst disease imaginable would be one that made a woman unattractive to men. That was the worst disease imaginable. Like, not cancer, not heart disease, not breaking your leg and not being able to get it fixed, no, being unattractive to men. And in the book, the doctor who wrote it, obviously, did you know that all men assess women from the ankles up? And it should be a goal of every woman to look good in a tennis skirt. I'm like, well, gee, thank you, doctor. That's not creepy at all. And this book took off. And why did it take off? Because there was an information void. No one was talking about menopause, and here was someone talking about it. The book sold 700,000 copies in the first 7 months, which is incredible. And what was behind this? Pharma was behind it. Because if you want to sell your product, you've got to have a hook, and the hook was menopause was a disease. And this is an actual ad for Premarin that I have there. Is he suffering from estrogen deficiency? She is the reason why. I'm like, oh, really? So everything that's going wrong in your household is to do with the woman. Okay, I'm sure looking at you that you do your share of the housework. Yeah. I'm sure you're just a treat when you come home from work. And so this idea that women had to medicate themselves to make a happy household. There was very little discussion in this book about, well, you might have hot flashes that need to be treated. There wasn't treatment for the things that were going on with you that needed to be treated. You need to be treated so you could be accepted in society, which is, a completely different and abhorrent message. Then what happened, because that message didn't really, you can only tell women that they're ugly old crones for so long, and that doesn't really work for marketing. So then what happened, pharma decided that they would push estrogen as the fountain of youth. And that became, everybody was giving estrogen to prolong life, for heart disease, prevent heart disease, all these types of things. And then that was all put to halt by the Women's Health Initiative, which was the largest randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial that's actually ever been done. And the problem is, again, not the study, but how the study was interpreted. The study was never meant to say, don't prescribe it for hot flashes, don't prescribe it because you're feeling unwell. Don't prescribe it for heart disease because there's a slight increased risk of breast cancer. So that doesn't justify giving it because it doesn't prevent heart disease, but it does justify it if you're suffering. Those are different decisions, right? But the problem is nuance is not something that the press does well. And in the United States anyway, there were tons of malpractice lawyers that, you have a study that says there's cancer, great, have you been harmed? Call, 1-800, I'm gonna sue. And we had the second wave of disinformation all about the superiority of so-called bioidentical hormones, which is a made-up term and it's not really medical. And medicine regrouped, but the problem is we had this emergence of snake oil. And now we're actually in a third wave of disinformation about menopause, actually with a lot of chiropractors and naturopaths and even some physicians promoting disinformation about hormone therapy, because it's the disinformation that gets the attention, not the actual facts. And to really sort of punch home the impact of celebrity culture on misinformation and health, I'm going to look at this graph. This is a Google search, and it shows you the peak for bioidentical hormones. So there was one in January 2004, there was one a little bit later, and there was one in early January 2009. Those all correspond to the 3 Suzanne Somers books. The Sexy Years, Discover the Hormone Connection, The Secret to Fabulous Sex, Great Health, and Vitality for Women and Men. Ageless, The Naked Truth About Bioidentical Hormones. Stay Young and Sexy with Bioidentical Hormone Replacement, The Science Explained. Those 3 books sound like they're exactly the same thing, right? You just maybe updated them and put them out again, and all 3 of those created this kind of cultural firestorm. And the reason why the third one is so big is that's when Suzanne Somers was on Oprah. talking about it, right? So we see this with the vaccine literature when it's celebrities were responsible for something like 50% of the disinformation that was seen on social media, even though they only did 10% of the posts, right, about vaccines and COVID. So celebrities have this outrageous impact in spreading disinformation. And so what are the consequences? Well, social media might lead you to believe that without estrogen, your brain will crumble, that you will die. You're just going to, that's it. 52, you're done clocking out. And while more women do get dementia than men, it's actually really complicated. In fact, 5% of dementia is related to lack of education. And who is more likely to have a lack of education? Women versus men. So you could actually say that the patriarchy is a cause of dementia, right? So it gets very difficult to sort these things out because you have to be able to account for all of these stressors that women face that can also have a negative effect on the brain. Meaning it's complicated, and complicated things deserve research. They don't deserve reactionary things. And so because the data is absolutely not clear about estrogen preventing dementia at all, it is not clear that no menopause society recommends it for that reason. And the tragedy of this discussion, when you go on social media, if you didn't know anything about dementia and menopause, you would think that you must be on estrogen. The tragedy is that it takes away from the fact that 45% of dementia is preventable, and there are things that can be done. So you actually have this hard science that tells us how we can improve people's lives, and that gets brushed over because of something that is glossier and is presented in a way to women much in the same way that I talked about that birth control being a class 1 carcinogen. They don't want you to know about it. It's an easy answer. It's truthy. It ties into those God terms. And so you have to be very careful about those things. And so we're in this time of a strange duality where we need to recognize that women's health has been understudied and underfunded and underdiscussed, and there are real world consequences. But we're also in a time where we are embracing understudied therapies, where basic science, we don't have the formative basic science, and people are making a leap from small studies to we should be doing this for all women, which your null hypothesis might not actually be correct. So it's really important that people deserve science. Women deserve science. When you make this jump and you say, well, yeah, women's health is understudied, so I'm just going to give you this thing that's understudied, you're part of the problem. And we embrace misinformation and completely an understudied snake oil as empowerment, and that is a really dangerous idea. And so we have this shifting mantle of expertise. We have a consequence of ivory tower medicine. We have a consequence of historical neglect. We have a consequence of press looking for stories where maybe they're not looking for the right story. Consequence of snake oil being unencumbered by the truth. When you don't have to tell the truth, you can say a lot of things. We favor the first piece of information we hear. That's a very human thing. And the illusory truth effect. Repetition breeds accuracy. And what is social media? It's repetition. So I want to end with a quote from Carl Sagan. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. And you could use pseudoscience for the bamboozle, you could use the patriarchy. So you have to be very careful. So moving forward, I'd like everybody to think about the fact that pseudoscience and the patriarchy speak the same language, that education is important as a pre-bunking concept. It actually works. The more you know, the less you are likely to be taken in. There is actually value in debunking, and I think we might talk a little bit about that afterwards, and understand that there are complex forces at play, and when people try to give you easy answers, most answers in science aren't easy. Thank you very much.
This session was recorded live at Carriageworks Sydney in August 2024. The Festival of Dangerous Ideas is presented by the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer counselling for individuals, leadership and development services, events, courses and educational resources. As a not-for-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations and memberships. Please visit ethics.org.au to find out more. Thank you.